it's one of those things that it's not enough to
Mm.
just go better luck next time.
Hmm.
You know, it requires strategy. And of the patients that I treat who end up being successful and taking home healthy babies, it happens because of strategy, not because of luck. And that's the big
Hmm.
thing that I think people need to understand and realize is that there is often more, you just don't know what it is yet.
I'm Rachel, and you're listening to the Owning Your Sexual Self podcast. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Owning Your Sexual Self podcast. We have on an incredible guest today. We have on Gabriela Rosa, and we are talking all about male and female infertility. And Gabriela, you are a fertility specialist, a neuropath, Harvard University Award scholar, and the founder of the Rosa Institute. So I'm very excited to dive into the conversation today and just hear a little bit more about you and this road of infertility that you speak on so often.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time since I have been helping couples overcome infertility, recurrent miscarriage, and failed treatments. And I think that, I have a unique perspective on that because of the length of time that I have been doing it, but also my training, integrative medicine and being a naturopathic doctor with traditional kind of expertise I've got a master's in science, in medicine and human genetics. So it's kind of like, it's the blending of the best worlds, of all the,
Hmm.
the best that you can of both worlds, which is great. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah. And yeah, just so we don't skate over it. I mean, the impact that you've had, you said working with thousands of couples. We're talking over 140,000 couples, over 110 plus countries. And again, yeah, really taking this holistic and virtual, so just accessible to so many people around the world, to the fertility clinic, which is, again, I just commend you. Like, I love that you're in this space and you're able to you offer this to so many people.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. We were actually doing a little bit of a media kit update this week, and I actually all of a sudden got a little bit shocked when my team were like, actually, we just looked at the numbers and it's been 204,500 and whatever. And I'm like,
Oh
okay,
my
so
gosh.
we've got to update our numbers. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it has been a really wonderful journey from the perspective too that, like I've run different programs and I have a free online program for fertility that people can access. And a lot of times people don't know what they don't know. And that's the thing that gets them stuck on their journey to parenthood.
Mm.
And that's why the Fertility Challenge, which is the program that I've kind of brought out. Like, it's funny. I've been doing this work since 2001, and since 2011, I've been running the Fertility Challenge free online program. And what's really fascinating, and we literally have one happening right now, and there's one that happens multiple times a year. But what's funny about it is that every single time, like to me, no matter how many times I've spoken on a specific topic or a specific exposure or a specific impact on something that we do on a day-to-day basis that has a either positive or negative impact on fertility. How frequently, because to me it's not new anymore,
Hmm.
obviously.
Hmm.
You've spoken about it so many times, it's kind of like, okay. But at the same time, I understand that for that person, it's their first time. And so every time that I speak about it, I think like, surely people are going to know this by now. And then
Hmm.
they're like, oh my God, that blew my mind. And I'm like, wow, like give you an example, a quick little example. Like a lot of times people don't realize that the impact of drinking unfiltered water on their fertility and their reproduction
Wow.
because there are so many chemicals. There's like literally thousands of chemical signatures within a sample of unfiltered water. And if you're drinking that, it obviously, exposure to disease, exposure to outcome is essentially what you're going to expect in
Mm.
public health. That's what we're looking for. What are the effects of day-to-day lifestyle environment and what is the likelihood of health or disease, right? Which is the
Hmm.
outcome that you're looking at. And, when it comes to fertility, there are so many of those things that we are surrounded by in our day to day. Some we can influence, some we can't. Water is one of those that we are obviously surrounded by and consume on a
Yeah.
daily basis several times a day, and either that water is going to be health promoting and health giving, or it's going to be health detracting. And so a simple solution there is like, okay, just install a reverse osmosis filter, or a very good quality water filter, and you've handled that piece. But the reality of it is that when people don't understand that that's even a problem, or they don't understand the depth of the problem, it's easy to dismiss and go, oh, it's just water, I'll just buy bottled water, which does not solve the problem. And hence why, didn't actually say go and get yourself bottled water, because then you're in touch with even more chemicals and more directly impacting, particularly things like your phthalates, bisphenols, because of the plastic in the
Hmm.
water. Also, often, those bottles have been sitting in the sun, have been transported, have been in there for ages. And whatever is leaching into that water, you are then consuming. And those are endocrine disruptors, those are
Hmm.
blockers to how your hormones operate. So there are things like that often people don't really understand, or don't really, know that it can be impactful to them to first learn, and to
Hmm.
second make adjustments that are going to be in their best interest.
Yeah, oh my gosh, we're not even 5 minutes in. You're already dropping some knowledge on us. Like, I'm sure people are listening to this, like, yeah, didn't know that, didn't realize that that was a thing. And yeah, I'd love to just help listeners understand infertility more as a whole, because I think when we think about infertility, it mostly comes up as a female issue, and that we're learning more and more that that's not necessarily the case. So please tell us, like, what is the reality about male and female contributions when it comes to fertility?
Yeah, I think this is one of those unpopular, pieces of information for
Hmm.
some men, because they think like, okay, infertility is a woman's issue. And sometimes, I'm seeing a little bit of a distinction these days. 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, it was much more prevalent that men would shy away from having investigations and overtly say, no, there's nothing wrong with me,
Hmm.
and kind of continue to push that line. I think today people are much more open to the possibility that, okay, maybe this is not just a woman's issue. Although, of course, you have variations to that rule everywhere.
Hmm.
But the reality of it is that female fertility accounts for only 40% of the fertility equation.
Wow.
Male fertility equates for the other 40%. And so in that, it's a 50-50 split,
Mm.
right? So, and the 20% of that's kind of left over is to do with embryonic factors, or embryo development, or things that support or detract from implantation, and that embryo's ability to continue to grow, and of course a healthy pregnancy, and being delivered to term. And sometimes within that 20%, you're going to have things that are specifically derived and driven by the embryo itself.
Hmm.
And then you will have environmental factors, for example, whether the lining, is welcoming enough, the lining of the uterus, whether, there are external chemicals and toxins impacting that embryo formation and development. So, for example, if a man smokes and their wife is pregnant, that secondhand smoke is definitely going to be impacting the risk of keeping a healthy pregnancy to term.
Mm.
So it's like, even though that's not necessary, and of course, without even saying it, we know that the egg and the sperm are also going to be affected by first-hand, second-hand, and third-hand smoke. It kind of shocks me still
Hmm. Hmm.
when I talk to people who have been infertile sometimes for years and are still smoking. I'm like, okay, and I get it, a very addictive substance. There's contention for some people in terms of, what do I want more? Do I really want to change my lifestyle if things aren't working? well, what if things aren't working because you're not changing your lifestyle? Like,
Mhm.
then what?
Yeah,
Like,
it's
because
some
that's the
hard
most
truths.
yeah, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
most likely situation, is that it's not working because you're not changing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's hard to look at and it's hard to admit, but the sooner that a couple does look at it and admit it and really kind of take back their agency around what are the things that I can actually have an influence on and do something about, and what are
Mm-hmm.
the things that I just can't influence, the better the results, the faster the results.
Mm-hmm.
No matter
Mm-hmm.
how you're trying to conceive, whether you're trying to conceive naturally, whether you're using IVF, in either of those cases, in fact, in any case, whether it's donor egg, donor sperm, donor embryo, all of those factors are going to be improved or optimized by simply having better input into the biological system that then will deliver an outcome. And the
Mm-hmm.
way that we need to look at egg and sperm is as a milestone end outcome of many biochemical chain reactions that have started way before.
Mm-hmm.
The egg doesn't just poof, appear to be there, the sperm doesn't do the same, right? It's like there was an entire process, and for the egg itself, there's a 12-month process to actually go from primordial follicle, which is the follicles we are born with, to an ovulatory follicle. 12 months. So people will start to do something for 2 days and go, oh, I've done that thing and it didn't work. I'm like, okay, you just have not done it for long enough. And not to say that you need to, that you're delaying conception attempts or, pregnancy or whatever by making inputs into that biological system that improve your health and fertility, because the reality is that time will pass anyway. Either the time will pass with you being bathed and surrounded in an environment that's actually going to be beneficial to your health in a long term and to your fertility as a consequence, or it's going to pass by you speeding up entropy, which is chaos and disorder, right, in the biological system. That's essentially, those are the only two options. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a matter of, is it going to happen? Am I going to age? Am I going to die? Am I
Right.
going to? It's just a matter of when and
When.
how,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so, and at what speed? So the reality of it is that there is a lot we can do, but if we don't know what we don't know, and this is one of the things that I often hear, Rachel, is like people come to me, and usually the people who come to me, let me just kind of give a little bit of context, because I think
Sure.
that this is an important piece. Because what happens is this: most people have heard of people who have had a drunken one night stand and got pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Or another person who was like, oh, I wasn't trying to get pregnant. Oops, oops, baby, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
surprise. In fact, that happens to the majority of people in the general population. By 2 years, 93.6% of people have had a baby by 2 years of trying. In fact, the numbers, when we look at population data, we're looking at the fact that the average time to pregnancy for a couple at peak fertility is 3 months. So literally, it's have sex,
Wow.
get pregnant, have a baby, done. We're no longer having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine that when it gets to 6 months to 12 months, and 12 months of unprotected intercourse is essentially the self-proclaimed diagnosis of infertility, because essentially infertility is one of those really interesting conditions. In fact, it's one of the only conditions in medicine that are one self-reported by a number of time, a measure of time. Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
basically, what happens is all that you need to be diagnosed with infertility is to be having unprotected intercourse for 12 months,
Mm. Wow.
or having experienced miscarriages within that 12-month period, trying and not having a baby. That's one thing that people also don't understand, is that miscarriage and infertility are technically the same thing. So
Mm-hmm.
miscarriage is a subset of infertility.
That's in like that
So
20% that you were speaking to.
Well, it can be also due to the 40 and 40. It can
Mm,
happen because of 50% the egg, 50% the sperm.
mm,
But
mm,
that 20% of, is certainly part of what's going to happen as well. It's like if you have gotten pregnant and you've seen a positive pregnancy test and it disappeared at any point in time, if it was very early on, typically it's technically called a chemical pregnancy, which many people hate that term because it's still a pregnancy, right? And, otherwise it's going to be termed as a miscarriage if it's under 20 weeks. If it's post 20 weeks, it's labeled a stillbirth.
mhm,
And so basically what ends up happening in that situation is that the majority of couples who are in the self-reported 12 months, they will usually go to their doctor. They will have the conversation of, I've been trying for 12 months. It hasn't happened. What do you recommend? If you have a really good primary doctor, they might actually do some more testing. They might advise and guide you on certain things. Typically, they will send you to a specialist. And then, of course, when you get there, you're going to be referred to IVF.
mhm,
Right. And
mhm,
so that's kind of like the current healthcare pathway for people who are struggling to conceive. Now, what happens is that out of 100% of cycles that get started, IVF cycles that get started, the latest data shows that only 29% actually deliver a healthy baby. So that is a 71% failure rate.
mhm,
Okay, so what happens is that the majority of couples, and of course that cumulative rate improves, it goes up to about 50%. So, in 50% of cases, people will do multiple rounds of IVF and it will still not work. Sometimes 50% or more, depending on the situation, right? And
mm.
depending on the age as well. And typically, those are the people that come to see me. Right? So it's the people for whom not only it hasn't been straightforward because it's been more than 12 months and they haven't conceived, or they have done multiple treatments and it hasn't worked. Right. And, or, sometimes I'm blessed with the people who are proactive. It's amazing when that happens. I'm like, oh my
Mhm,
God, you haven't had any failed treatments and you're here. This is incredible. Because basically people now are starting to realize that the sooner they intervene in a positive way and get to the bottom of the proper diagnosis, because this is another thing that happens in the healthcare system, is that because the vast majority of patients conceive without trying, public health funding is finite and quite, like for the amount of people and amount of care that's needed for
mhm,
people to actually just live a decent life, there isn't enough to go around. And
mhm,
fertility is not a life-threatening condition, right? And so what happens is that it gets completely ignored, underfunded, underserviced, because basically, well, unless you're willing to pay as a couple and, privately, it's going to be something that you're not going to get a lot of support for.
mhm.
Right. And so what happens is that, and of course, and if you're paying, then, an average cost for an IVF cycle is something like 17 to 20,000 US
Yeah.
dollars. Right. And so it becomes that situation of like, one, can we afford to have treatment? Two, if we can, how many cycles are we actually able to have? Now, there was a study that was published in the journal called Human Reproduction, and it shows that, and this was out of 178,000 started IVF cycles, that they needed, on average, 8 IVF cycles to have close to an 80% live birth rate. Now, imagine that. Most people will not be able to afford 8 cycles or more to be able to take home a healthy baby. I mean, forget college, that's for sure. You know,
Yeah. No
we have
shit.
ChatGPT
Wow.
these days,
Yeah.
right? Is that most people are not going to be able to afford that. And so understanding, and part of the reason why this repeats itself, as I was saying before, is because funding is really not directed towards understanding the why
Mhm,
something is failing and not working when it comes to fertility, because most people conceive without trying. Okay.
mhm,
And so then what happens is that even the guidelines for testing and uncovering issues, let me give you an example. A woman has to have had three miscarriages before investigations are started.
Wow.
Imagine that. Imagine if you get pregnant, you see your baby's heartbeat at 8 weeks on a scan, and then you go for your second ultrasound at 12 weeks, and there's no heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine having to experience that three times
Mm.
before investigations begin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just
And
seems, yeah,
that,
it's like like make sure you've had enough trauma before you begin this.
yeah,
And then knowing that stress also plays a role in fertility, based on what I was reading in your things, right? We know this to be true. That, yeah, that makes zero sense to me. Like let's make sure
yeah,
you're really raw and emotional and traumatized before starting this. And then yeah, let's hope that you have enough money that you can give it a go at least 8 times, like to be some successful with it. That
yeah,
is
yeah.
wild.
Yeah. And so what happens, also in terms of miscarriages, and this is something that a lot of times people don't realize. Let's say you do have a miscarriage at 12 weeks. By the time the body gets back to baseline for you to be able to feel normal again, your
Mm,
uterus has gone back. Because by the time you're 12 weeks, like your uterus has expanded, your
hmm
hormones are
hmm
like your boobs are bigger, there's a whole lot of bodily changes that have occurred as a result of you being a third of the way through your pregnancy. Let's make no mistake about it. It's a third of the way through,
hmm
right? So it takes typically about the same amount of time for that kind of those changes to revert back to baseline.
mm,
Okay. So that a woman can really start trying it. Some doctors will say, yeah, you can start trying the next month, but it's unlikely to be successful anyway
mm,
because your body's not quite ready for conception yet. It's kind
hmm
of like getting over the fact that you've just given birth, so to
mm.
speak,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so let's say that you will go back to baseline and that's taken 6 months to get to baseline,
hmm
right? And then you start trying again. Most people who are having difficulty, it's very conservative to say that they will be pregnant in the next 6 months, but let's say that yes, they've been successful, they got pregnant again 6 months later.
hmm
That's 12 months down the track. Okay. Now let's say that this repeats itself and you have a miscarriage at 12 weeks and then you
mm
get back to baseline and then you try. That's 2 years down the track.
hmm
Now, if you're 39, 40, do you have time to have three miscarriages before investigations begin? Absolutely not.
mm Yeah,
Absolutely not, because you will surely run out of time to have a baby trying. And
yeah.
so that's why, for me and my patients, I am like ultra proactive to begin with, because I know that what people don't have to, a lot of times people are like, oh, you're running out of time and, you better hurry up and do this thing. And that's a lot of the pressure tactic that happens,
hmm
even though it's unknowingly or knowingly, I don't know, that happens through IVF clinics. It's like, oh no, you've got to hurry up, you've got to do this because you're running out of time. And actually, the way I see it is that not that people are running out of time, they're running out of cycles to waste. So the more that
hmm
you don't understand, like let's say, for example, like why are we having a miscarriage? If we have to wait three miscarriages before we start investigating, and there's something simple like antiphospholipid syndrome, for example, right? That's common, that causes clotting, and it's one of very known causes of miscarriage and increased risk of miscarriage. Now, let's say that that's the issue, and that doesn't get tested the first time around, and or even proactively tested in the preconception phase, right? You're going to be so much more likely to have a miscarriage, and let's say you have had two miscarriages 2 years later, and then that gets tested. You've got less chance of trying and actually being successful at 43 to have a baby, no matter how the mode of conception, whether you're trying through IVF or naturally, you've got less chance at 43 than you do at 40, right? And so it makes absolutely zero sense not to be very comprehensive with your testing
mm
before you start trying to get pregnant, because the problem isn't so much about you not conceiving. It's actually about all of these kind of starts and stops that can also happen, right?
mm
What I also see is that sometimes people come to me after 10 years, 15 years of infertility, and they think, well, I'm infertile. I've never been pregnant. I've never had a miscarriage. I say to them, it's very possible that you have been pregnant before, that you have had if there's no blocked fallopian tubes and we have a decent amount of sperm, it's very likely that the egg and the sperm have met at some point within a 15-year period,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then typically what hasn't actually happened either is fertilization has not occurred or implantation has failed. And so it's not that you haven't been pregnant. Similarly, when somebody goes through IVF and has an embryo transferred, at the point of transfer, you are pregnant no matter what. Even if you don't see a positive pregnancy test 2 weeks later, you are still pregnant, which means, and this is the important piece, is that we can't just say, oh, it's better luck next time. It's a numbers game. Just keep trying. Because that is what makes people run out of cycles to waste.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that we don't know what we don't know. So people come to me and say, I've tried everything and nothing has worked. And I'm like, well, actually, no, you haven't. You
Mm-hmm.
just have run out of things that you know you could try. Your ceiling of things you know, you've hit that for sure. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, there are other things that you're not even aware could be an issue for you.
Mm-hmm.
But that unless we uncover them, we keep having more of the same results and continue going around in circles. So that's why for me, I've developed a very in-depth framework, the fertile method, to ensure that we don't leave anything to chance, that we
Mm-hmm.
leave no stone unturned, that we literally are like it's going through the checklist. It's a
Mm-hmm.
giant thousands of items checklist, but it's a checklist that
Yeah.
we just go, okay, let's make sure that we don't leave things to chance. And that has worked incredibly well for my patients because my program, I studied it as part of my Harvard thesis for my master's in public health there. I'm currently doing my doctorate there. But when I did my master's, one of the things that I did was actually to go and understand who are the patients that we support, who are the patients that we get our best results for, what are the details of these cases,
Mm-hmm.
obviously knowing that we were applying the same reproducible framework, and we were able to demonstrate a 78.8% live birth rate for people who on average had been infertile for 4 years, plus or
Wow.
minus 2.5. And
Wow.
almost 50% of those people had had previously failed IVF cycles. The really
Incredible.
cool statistic
Yeah.
that we had was that, we had miscarriage rates prior to treatment were 53.5%, and we were able to get that down to 13.5% after treatment. So, it's one of those things that it's not enough to just go better luck next time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it requires strategy. And of the patients that I treat who end up being successful and taking home healthy babies, it happens because of strategy, not because of luck. And that's the big
Mm-hmm.
thing that I think people need to understand and realize is that there is often more, you just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, so that's when spoke in the beginning and said like you're bringing more of this holistic approach. So you're working with people. It sounds like more outside of just the medical perspective. Like you're looking at their nutrition, their lifestyle, their environment. The yes, hormones are included in this, but I'm thinking of other conditions like more from like female infertility, things like PCOS, endometriosis, thyroid issues, right? Like sperm health on the male side. Like there's so many moving factors to this. So when people are coming to you you're saying you're looking at it under that broader umbrella. So your scope is including all of these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting because, one of the things that we often see is that people will come in with some or all of those things that you just mentioned in
Hmm.
the same
Hmm.
couple, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm. Yes, yeah.
And so then like going, okay, let's prioritize and rank what it is that we need to work on first. Because you see, here's what happens. When you have an outcome, whether it's inability to conceive, inability to keep a healthy pregnancy to term, that is an end result, as I've mentioned earlier, of many biochemical chain reactions that start all the way much sooner,
Mm.
right? IVF is trying to address it from a very kind of close to the outcome perspective. But if we address it from there, we have less leverage to be able to actually make a difference to all of those other aspects. The other thing that we also need to understand is that throughout those biochemical pathways, there are multiple places that you will find and multiple impacts that will have an impact on various different things along that journey, which will impact different health conditions. So all that to say is this, if we start working much, much earlier upstream in
Mm,
terms of health and health optimization and reproductive function optimization, we are able to pick and clean up, so to speak, many more factors and issues that actually will impact the outcome and be able to help us to change it
mm,
because we're starting much, much higher upstream, you
hmm
see. Other than just going, okay, let's just get the egg and the sperm to meet. But hang on a second, what's happening with the thyroid? What's happening with the metabolic function? Do we have insulin resistance? What's happening with, and insulin resistance, mind you, will impact male and female fertility. We're knowing more and more these days about the impact of blood sugar dysregulation on sperm
hmm
parameters, as well as ovulation and the ability to actually impact pregnancy and keep a healthy pregnancy to term.
hmm
So the every single aspect of our lives will have an impact on whether things are working or not working so well,
hmm
right? It's almost like you need to look at it from the perspective of like, if you don't have the outcome that you want, because I had this patient once who came into my office and she was very, very upset, understandably. Like infertility it's a very challenging thing to go through, especially when all you see are people around you, having babies and getting pregnant. There's women in particular go through these stages where they grew up with all of these friends who all of a sudden they start getting married and having babies and doing all of these things. And then, women are very much comparing themselves with, but hang on a second, I don't have that yet, or I'm not there
hmm
yet, or whatever it is, right? And one interesting thing that often happens is that this comparison about, when is it going to be my turn? And what is it that I need to do? And so I had this patient who came to me and she was really upset because she was already super healthy, super organic, and, I would probably even go as far as to say crunchy,
hmm
much the kind of poster girl of wonderful health. And she wasn't getting pregnant. And she blurted out, she was crying, and then she blurted out, maybe I should just start shooting up heroin. Maybe then I'd get pregnant. And I'm like, okay, probably not a good idea. Don't know what to say here, but and it was very early on in my career, right? So I was like, that's an odd thing to say. But and I prompted her, I said, okay, I understand you're really upset, but why would you say that? And she goes, well, because you get all of these people just shooting up heroin and popping up babies right, left, and center. And I'm like, oh, yes,
It's the
I
shame
understand
comparison.
now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's that
hmm
comparison. But what's interesting about that particular comparison is the reason as to why that happens, you see. And
mm
so, why we see some people who are doing all of the right things and struggling to conceive, and some people who are doing all of the wrong things and popping up babies, kind of right, left, and center. And so, that led me to really understand and be able to explain to her, well, actually, the reason that happens is because think about it. We all have heard of people who have never smoked a day of their life and died of lung cancer. And we've
hmm
all heard of people who are chain smokers who have never developed cancer at all, right? They might have cardiovascular disease, they might have other issues, but they don't have cancer and they certainly don't have lung cancer. And so then you have to understand that just because the exposure is the same, the impact isn't always. There is differential impact because of epigenetics. The way that one exposure will affect one person versus another person will be different. And therefore, that's why some people end up with stage 4 cancer, other people end up with infertility, other people end up with neurological disease, other people end up with gastrointestinal disease, whatever it is,
hmm
right? And so basically, the most important takeaway from this conversation is this. If you want to be pregnant and you are doing all of the right things, or you know that there are things that you can still be improving upon, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality of it is that it does not matter that someone is shooting up heroin and getting pregnant if you're not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In other words, don't try this at home, right? So
Right.
don't go start shooting up heroin, but do continue to improve and optimize and look for other aspects that could be actually getting you stuck in your way because that person's journey is very different to yours.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is zero point in comparing. It's almost like you're comparing watermelons with blueberries.
Mm-hmm.
They are both delicious summer fruits. And that's where the similarities, are very close to end
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they're very different. They grow in very different ways. They have very different trajectories. They die in very different ways.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing is completely different. You can't compare them. And objectively, when we look at watermelons and blueberries as a comparison, we go, yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Of
Mm-hmm.
course. But
Yeah.
we tend to fail on that when it comes to humans.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we tend to think that just because we are both human, that it should be all of the same, and it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was like such a beautiful reflection to make on the show, and really this whole conversation. My gosh, like we're already 40 minutes in. Like this is wild, and I love that this show, Owning Your Sexual Self, like a lot of different topics on here. I think this was a great intro to male and female infertility, and you have many resources. As you said, you have this program, you have your podcast as well, Talk Sex with Gabriela Rosa, and your book on fertility breakthrough. So for people that are listening to this show right now, and they're like, wow, I'm really wanting more. I want to hear more from her. What are those good outlets for people to continue this conversation and continue this knowledge?
Yes, absolutely. So, fertility breakthrough, overcoming infertility and
Mm.
recurrent miscarriage when other treatments have failed. The book is free on Spotify and YouTube as well. Obviously available in every bookseller, but I think that it's a really great, compact way to get started. I do read the book, so you will get my voice. If you don't like it, read it. Um, and so basically that's one way. The fertility challenge is another way, and I highly recommend it for anybody who, really wants to kind of dive deeper and understand more and understand about the implementation pieces that they can
Mhm.
actually do. So they can go to my website, which is fertilitybreakthrough.com, and or Google my name, Gabriela Rosa, Gabriela Rosa, and it's Gabriella with one L. But basically, if they go to the website, fertilitybreakthrough.com, usually on the front of the website, they will be able to figure out how to register. It's free. It has been free for the last, 1.5 decades since it
Mhm.
started,
Mhm.
and it will continue to be free. I'm very passionate about education. I'm very
Mhm.
passionate about population health, and I feel that this is a way in which people can engage,
Mhm.
at absolutely no obligation, but really gain a massive amount of benefit from it. So, yeah, those are
Yeah.
really great places to start.
Yeah, and thank you for making that accessible for so many. Because as you said, right, we named already the cost of what IVF treatment would be for people. And so the fact that people can get this through so many different outlets, I think is really wonderful. And yeah, I'm curious from you, just kind of as final takeaways here. So somebody's listening to this that is struggling with infertility. What is the message that you want them to remember after this episode today?
Pregnant now to get pregnant later. The
Mm,
reality is that everything that you do today as a couple, so this applies to both men and women, like
hmm
imagine that, men have to imagine being pregnant and delivering a baby, but just indulge me for a moment. Right now within you, you already have 50% of that little baby that you want to create. It's really important that you're giving it the environment and all of the nutrients and nourishment and resources that it needs to
hmm
develop in a way that's going to most benefit that meeting of the egg and the sperm, and of course the embryo that it will create. That's the
hmm
only place of kind of input that we have before the embryo becomes the embryo to optimize the embryo,
hmm
right? And so that's a really important takeaway, is that every single thing that you would absolutely start doing or stop doing if you were pregnant right now are the things that you need to start doing and stop doing right now without a deadline.
hmm
And you do that until you're holding your baby. It's
hmm
really that important.
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, it's the unlock. It's the
Mm-hmm.
thing that actually makes them be able to go from struggling with infertility, miscarriage, failed treatments to be able to take home their healthy baby. And of course, with that comes doing the proper diagnostics, because you can be putting in all of the wonderful nutrients into your body. You have an STI that hasn't been treated, and you are not going to take home a
Mm-hmm.
healthy baby. So you can't ignore that. This has to be a comprehensive approach. It can't
Mm-hmm.
be a one-sided, situation. But
Mm-hmm.
act pregnant now to get pregnant later. That's the
Mm.
biggest takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because I feel what I'm hearing more and more as time goes on is women are waiting later in life to get pregnant. And so I'm maybe in my 20s, I'm like, well, I know someday I want to, but I'm not ready right now. And so if that's the listener that's listening right now, that applies. And it's also the listener that is already been going through the fertility struggles where if I were to become pregnant, what would I be doing? Let me start doing those things now to support this. And many of these changes and behaviors are also just supporting overall general health too, right? Like it's
Absolutely.
not
A
just your
hundred
fertility health,
percent.
but yeah, just
Yeah,
overall
a
good
hundred
health
percent.
choices.
Absolutely. And I think that something that you said that is so important to highlight is that reproductive health starts at the womb.
Mm-hmm.
It starts at the womb. We, you and I, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
listening to this, were in their grandmother's womb
Mm-hmm.
when
It's
your mother was
wild.
being gestated
Mm-hmm.
as a fetus, right? Women are born with all the eggs we ever have. So we were all in our grandmother's wombs.
Mm-hmm.
So what the inputs, the exposures that your grandmother had, especially before birth, especially as she was gestating your mother, you also had, and
Mm-hmm.
that continues on. So all of the things that we do, that's why, when I see little girls painting their nails and wearing makeup, I'm like, no, don't do that to little girls, because
Mm-hmm.
so many of these nail polishers and acetone removers and non-acetone removers and all of those things are directly linked to infertility, miscarriage, and things that happen
Mm-hmm.
later in life, and puberty blockers, and all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of things, or even precocious puberty as a result of these endocrine disruptors that get absorbed by the nails and the nail beds, and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. So it's kind of like what you said is so true. It's whether you're a teen, whether you are in your 20s, 30s, trying to conceive right now or wanting to in the future. The same thing applies to all people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a very important note as well for people
Mm-hmm.
to know.
Yeah.
And this applies to boys and girls. It's so funny because I have two boys, and one is 13, the other is 10. And I'm constantly, like they have all these ideas about what they're going to do and what they want and this and that and wherever else, right? Like, oh my God, children, how did this happen? And so often my son will say, Mum, can I, like, I don't know, like, can I do something? And I'll say, no, you can't, because it's not good for your health, in the long term. And usually I'm looking at not just his overall health, I'm looking at his reproductive health, not because I want to be a grandmother per se,
Right.
but I want him to be
Yeah.
able to have the option,
Mm-hmm.
like if
Mm-hmm.
he wants that, then great. Like it's making it easier for your children to be able to reproduce later in life if they so choose. They may also decide that no, they don't want to have children. That's okay. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is that most people want to have the option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, options are good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, thank you
yeah.
so much again, yeah, for this conversation. I think this again was a great intro for people that are wanting to just learn more about this topic and yeah, just this different approach that you bring and something different than maybe what they've been hearing in their medical settings if they're in this world right now. So yeah, thank you so much for the resources. We'll make sure to tag all of that in the show notes. And yeah, any final words before we sign off here?
Just take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Take care of your health. Take care of your mental health, and get a water filter.
Yes.
Good quality water
Yeah.
filter,
Circling
please
back to
do
the
that.
beginning.
Whatever you do, get a quality water filter. That's
Yes.
essential.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you loved it, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if you really fucking loved it, make sure to tag me on social media at @TheRachelMain. I'll see you next week.